The alarm buzzed at 6:45 a.m. sharp, just like it did every morning. In a cramped one-bedroom apartment above a noisy corner store, Ayan Malik dragged himself out of bed, stepped over a pile of books, and shuffled into the kitchenette. The light flickered overhead. Another thing he couldn't afford to fix yet. He stirred instant coffee with a bent spoon, stared out the grimy window, and exhaled deeply. Outside, the world moved quickly. Cars honking, people rushing, briefcases swinging. But inside, time dragged like cement. Ayan was 28, wiry, quiet, with eyes that held more than he said. He wore secondhand clothes that never quite fit and shoes that had seen better years. A former computer science student who had dropped out in his final year, Ayan had since drifted from one low-paying freelance gig to another, designing websites, fixing broken code, and offering design consultations to people who rarely paid on time. To most people, Ayan looked like someone who had given up. But deep down, he hadn't. He just wasn't ready to show the world what he'd been building. His family certainly had their opinions. Still playing with your laptop all day? His eldest sister, Salma, would sneer every time they crossed paths at a family event. She was a successful lawyer with a pristine home, diamond-studded bangles, and a social media presence that made her seem like royalty. You should have just finished your degree. Uncle Faisal, the self-proclaimed patriarch, once said at a dinner, Ayan's the dreamer. Every family has one. Lives in fantasy, eats real food paid by others. The table had erupted in laughter. Ayan had smiled politely, his eyes burning. His mother, though more gentle, didn't hide her disappointment either. Beta, it's time you grew up. I know you're gifted, but talent is nothing without results. Look at your cousins. Comparison was the poison that flowed freely in the Malik family. The cousins were engineers, doctors, entrepreneurs. Ayan was the ghost in the group photos, always tucked in the back, half smiling, half ashamed. He had stopped attending family events altogether. It was easier that way. Less judgment, less pressure, less pretending. But behind closed doors, Ayan wasn't idle. For the past 4 years, he had poured every spare minute into a project no one knew about. Not even his best friend Samir, who thought Ayan had given up on his dreams. It began with an idea, an AI-based financial tool that helped small businesses forecast profits, manage inventory, and optimize operations. It was clean, efficient, and designed for underdog entrepreneurs who couldn't afford expensive consultants. It was called Tijara, meaning trade in Arabic. He coded late into the night, 7 days a week, skipping outings, delaying gratification, ignoring dating apps. He read, experimented, failed, restarted. He took online courses in machine learning, UX design, and business modeling, sometimes sleeping just 4 hours a night. Most days it felt like he was sprinting through mud. No investors. No co-founders. Just Ayan, a thrift store laptop, and an unshakable vision. And yet, despite the passion, doubt crept in like mold. Maybe they were right. Maybe he was wasting his life. Maybe dreams were only for those born into safety nets. But every time he hovered over the delete button, he'd remember his grandfather's words. Build something with your own hands, and no one can ever take it from you. Ayan hadn't known his grandfather well, but those words stayed. They rooted into his bones. That morning, after his 3rd sip of coffee, Ayan opened his laptop and checked his email. A message from a beta tester. Subject line, "This tool just saved my business." His eyes widened. The user, a woman who ran a handmade soap business in rural Kenya, wrote in glowing detail how Tijara helped her predict demand and avoid overstocking, saving her hundreds of dollars. She ended the email with, "I don't know who you are, but you changed my life." Ayan stared at the screen. A strange stillness fell over him. In that moment, something shifted. It wasn't pride or triumph. It was validation, a whisper that maybe he wasn't crazy after all. That same week, he received 2 more messages. Then 5. Then 20. Small business owners from Turkey, India, Brazil, even a startup in Romania. All using Tijara. All praising its simplicity, its power. The app had quietly reached over 700 users in just a month, through word of mouth alone. But no one in his family knew, and they wouldn't believe it even if he told them. Later that Friday, as rain tapped against the windows, Ayan received a call from Samir. "Yo, you ghosted me again," Samir joked. "You're gonna die a mysterious hacker in a cave." "I've been focused," Ayan replied. "I get it, man. Just don't burn out. I'm here if you need to talk. Or breathe. Or shower." Ayan chuckled. Before hanging up, Samir said something odd. "By the way, your sister posted on Facebook about you. Something like, 'Some people just never grow up.'" Ayan's smile faded. Even when silent, they found ways to throw stones. That night, Ayan sat cross-legged on his mattress, stared at his laptop, and whispered, "They won't believe me now. But one day, they'll know." Outside, thunder rolled in the sky, and somewhere inside Ayan's heart, a storm began to rise. He didn't know it yet, but within months, everything would change. 3 weeks after that thunderstorm night, Tijara crossed a critical milestone: 5,000 active users. The growth wasn't viral. It was organic, slow-burning, and deeply loyal. People weren't just using the platform, they were recommending it in private WhatsApp groups, in Reddit threads, in low-budget entrepreneurship forums where every dollar mattered. Ayan watched it unfold with awe. But he still hadn't told anyone, not even Samir. What kept him quiet wasn't fear. It was strategy. Ayan knew what he had created, but he also knew what it could become. He wasn't chasing clout or validation anymore. He was building leverage. The kind that didn't ask for a seat at the table, but owned the table. His life on the outside hadn't changed much. He still wore the same clothes, rode public buses, and ordered the cheapest items off any menu. His family still believed he was unemployed or freelancing here and there. Their comments continued like background noise, dismissing, mocking, or worse, pitying him. What they didn't see was the $47,000 sitting in his business account from subscriptions, donations, and beta investors. Or the call he had with a venture capital firm in Berlin that ended with, "We want in $1.2 million valuation. Send us the deck." But the biggest turning point came one ordinary Tuesday. Ayan received an email from an international NGO focused on refugee empowerment. They had stumbled across Tijara while searching for tech solutions for displaced communities. The email was short and powerful. "We believe Tijara could help thousands of refugee entrepreneurs rebuild their lives. Are you open to discussing integration at scale?" Ayan's hand trembled on the mouse. He knew the answer, but it still took him a full minute to click reply. "Yes. Let's talk." That single conversation opened a door he didn't expect, one that led to contracts, funding opportunities, and government interest. Tijara wasn't just a startup now. It was becoming a movement, but none of this made it to the family WhatsApp group. There, things were as toxic as ever. The group was filled with pictures of luxury cars, vacation homes, and honor plaques. Every cousin had something to flex. Every relative was a cheerleader for someone else, just not Ayan. One day, during a particularly smug exchange between Salma and Uncle Faisal about real success, someone dropped a comment. "Ayan, what are you even doing with your life? Still chasing unicorns?" That comment got 12 laughing emojis. Ayan read it in silence, then muted the group. But that night he made a decision. One that would change everything. He would go to the upcoming family reunion. Not out of spite, but because it was time. He spent the next month preparing. Not his clothes or his words, but his launch. The full version of Tijara, version 3.0, was ready. Polished. Scalable. Secure. He rebranded the website, added new case studies, and set up a media kit. Then, 3 days before the reunion, he issued a global press release titled, "Tijara app empowers over 25,000 small businesses in 14 countries." The story ran on 2 tech blogs and 1 mainstream outlet. Nothing huge, but enough to spark a ripple. Then came the LinkedIn post. He wrote, "For 4 years, I've been working silently on a tool for those who are often ignored by big tech. Today, we're proud to say we've crossed 25K users. To anyone who's been told their dream is unrealistic, I hear you. Keep building. The world needs your voice." The post exploded. Messages poured in. Recruiters, reporters, venture capitalists. One influencer even reposted it, saying, "This is what tech should look like." By the morning of the reunion, his name was trending in 3 niche entrepreneur circles. But still, he said nothing to his family. The reunion was held in a grand banquet hall. Crystal chandeliers, white tablecloths, waiters in tuxedos. The Malik family spared no expense when it came to appearances. Ayan walked in wearing a clean but simple black shirt, no watch, no designer shoes. The moment he entered, heads turned. Some smirked. Others exchanged glances. Someone whispered, "He came?" Salma walked up, flanked by 2 cousins.
Ayan.
"You finally showed up. Took a break from coding." He smiled. "Something like that." She laughed. "Well, good. Maybe you'll meet someone here who can help you get a real job." The sarcasm stung. But Ayan just nodded. He made his way to a quiet corner, plate in hand, sipping soda. Watching. The evening rolled on. Toasts were made. Successes were celebrated. Then, in a twist of fate, or perhaps divine irony, one of the uncles stood up and said, "We've had so many achievements this year. Doctors, engineers, even an Olympic qualifier. Anyone else want to share something before we wrap up?" The room was quiet. Then someone added with a snort, "Maybe Ayan launched another blog?" Laughter rippled. But Ayan stood. "Actually," he said, steady but soft, "I do have something to share." All eyes turned. "I run a company called Tijara. It's a tool that helps small business owners manage and grow their operations. We just crossed 25,000 users across 14 countries." Silence. "I started it 4 years ago. Bootstrapped. No investors, no co-founders. Just me and a mission." He paused, then added, "We just signed a global partnership with an international NGO, and I've received 2 acquisition offers this week." Someone coughed. Another dropped a fork. Ayan continued, "I didn't come here to impress anyone. I came because I wanted to show my younger cousins and maybe remind myself that being different isn't failure. It's freedom." And with that, he sat down. The silence that followed was louder than any applause could have been. But it didn't matter, because at that moment, the balance of power shifted, and they all knew it. The room remained frozen for a few seconds after Ayan sat down. Even the chatter of silverware paused, as if the walls themselves were recalibrating everything they thought they knew about him. Then came the awkward coughs, a clink of a glass, and finally, reluctant applause. It started with the younger cousins, the ones who had always hovered on the periphery, who had dreams their parents didn't understand. They clapped first, slow and unsure. Then the applause grew, more hands joining in, not because they wanted to, but because they had to. Because silence would have meant denial. And no one could deny it now. Ayan had arrived. The very uncle who once told him to grow up and get a government job walked over, drink in hand, trying to be casual. "So, Tijara, huh? Sounds impressive. You really built that yourself?" Ayan nodded, politely.
"Yes. Just me."
"Interesting, very interesting. You know, I've got a friend in Dubai looking to invest in tech. Maybe I should introduce you." Ayan smiled faintly. "Maybe. But we're good for now." And that was the real shift, not just in their perception, but in his power. He no longer needed validation, favors, or permission. He had crossed the threshold from ridicule to relevance, and he wasn't going back. But the most important reaction came not from the uncles or the cousins. It came from his father. Throughout the evening, Mr. Malik had said little. He had sat in the middle of the long table, observing like a silent general, watching his empire of children and grandchildren parade their accomplishments. He had dismissed Ayan years ago, not with cruelty, but with that lethal kind of disappointment that cuts deeper than hate. In his eyes, Ayan had always been the one who didn't follow the blueprint. The one who refused the family name in favor of what? Digital dreams? Apps? But now, he stood before something undeniable. Ayan had not just survived. He had built something real. After the dinner ended, when most guests had trickled toward the valet line, Mr. Malik walked over. His steps were slow, deliberate. Ayan stood as he approached. They stared at each other. father to son, history hanging between them like an invisible storm. Then Mr. Malik did something Ayan never expected. He extended his hand. "I read the article," he said quietly. "You did well." It wasn't a hug. It wasn't a confession of regret. But for Mr. Malik, it was the equivalent of a standing ovation. Ayan shook his hand. "Thank you." And that was it. No fireworks. No dramatic reconciliation. But something important had changed. For the first time, Ayan felt seen. That night, Ayan walked back to his apartment alone. He didn't call anyone. He didn't tweet. He didn't even open his laptop. He sat on the edge of his bed, staring out the window at the blinking city lights, his thoughts quiet for the first time in years. He had done it. But success didn't feel like revenge. It felt like release. He wasn't carrying the burden of needing to prove himself anymore. He had already proven it, to himself and to the world. Everything that came next would be a choice, not a fight. But just as he settled into that peace, his phone buzzed. A new email. Subject: Tijara x UNDP proposal. Ayan blinked. He opened it. "Dear Mr. Malik, we've reviewed Tijara's model and believe it could be integrated into several of our UNDP initiatives across Southeast Asia. We would like to formally invite you to Geneva to present your work during the Global Innovation Forum." He reread it twice, his heart racing. Geneva. UNDP. Global Innovation Forum. His small, stubborn idea, the one everyone laughed at, was now being invited to speak on the global stage. Ayan exhaled, then looked up at the ceiling. He remembered all the nights he'd cried silently in that room, questioning himself. All the insults, the doubt, the moments he almost quit. And now he was being flown across the world because he dared to believe when no one else did. But fate wasn't done surprising him yet. The next day, just as he was drafting a reply to the UNDP, he received another call. Unknown number. He answered. "Hello, is this Ayan Malik?" "Yes. This is Rena from Forbes Middle East. We saw your story through LinkedIn and a few media circles. Would you be open to doing a feature for our 30 under 30-foot series?" He froze. "Forbes?" he whispered. "Yes. Of course." And just like that, the dominoes kept falling. Partnership offers. Investment inquiries. A podcast request from a major network. His inbox became a flood. But amid the rising tide, Ayan stayed grounded. Because he knew what it had cost him to get here. He still lived in the same apartment. Still wore the same watchless wrist. Still kept his receipts. But inside, he was no longer the boy who craved acceptance. He was the man who created his own path. Weeks passed. The buzz from the dinner faded, but the impact it left behind was permanent. The family group chat, once filled with silent judgment or muted praise, was now flooded with articles mentioning Tijara, pictures of Ayan at events, and even awkward messages like, "Mashallah beta. So proud of you." Even those who hadn't spoken to him in years were now reaching out with the same phrase. "Let's catch up soon." Funny how people change when your name starts showing up in headlines. But Ayan didn't respond to most of them. Not out of spite, but because he was done performing for people who only saw his value once the world validated it. Instead, he focused on what mattered, scaling Tijara, hiring people from backgrounds like his, and mentoring younger entrepreneurs who were tired of being laughed at for thinking differently. Every decision he made was rooted in a memory. He remembered what it felt like to have no one believe in him. So now he became the person he once needed. Ayan opened a scholarship fund for underprivileged students in tech. He invested in a startup by a young girl who reminded him of his own rejected pitches. He quietly helped one of his cousins pay off medical school debt without ever revealing his name. He didn't do it to be praised. He did it because he knew how it felt to be overlooked. But behind the scenes, something else was shifting too, within his own family. His father, Mr. Malik, had started mentioning him more and more during conversations with other family members. "Did you see the new Tijara partnership? You know Ayan's flying to Geneva this week." Even though his tone remained serious, everyone could see it. Pride had crept into his voice. It wasn't loud. It wasn't boastful. But it was there. Ayan's mother noticed it first. One evening, She called and said softly, "He keeps your Forbes picture in his drawer. Showed it to the neighbors yesterday." Ayan didn't say much, just smiled. Because after all those years, he had learned that validation from others was sweet, but never the goal. The goal had always been freedom. And that's exactly what he had now. But success doesn't always fix what's broken. Sometimes it just puts it under a brighter light. One weekend, he returned home for Eid. As he walked through the same gate he used to storm out of years ago, his younger cousins ran up to him, not with mockery in their eyes, but with admiration. They asked about Tijara, about coding, about how to pitch an idea. His father watched from the veranda, quiet but alert. Over dinner, they sat opposite each other, like old times. But this time, the table felt level. His father finally spoke. "You've made a name for yourself," he said. "But I still don't understand what you do." Ayan laughed, not out of sarcasm, but with genuine warmth. "That's okay. You don't need to." There was a long pause. Then his father added, "But I do want to learn." That simple sentence undid years of silence. The next morning, Ayan showed his father how the Tijara dashboard worked, how artisans from villages could upload their products, how the system matched them with buyers in real time. His father asked questions, took notes, even tried navigating it himself. It was awkward,
Clumsy.
but it was the first real conversation they'd had in years. And it wasn't about proving anything. It was about connecting. That was the real win. Meanwhile, things moved fast on the global front. Geneva was a success. The crowd gave him a standing ovation. Delegates from various countries approached him with offers to replicate Tijara's model in Africa, South America, and parts of rural Europe. He stood in those rooms, not as the outsider from a middle-class family in Karachi, but as a thought leader, someone who had created real, scalable change. On his flight back, staring out the window at clouds lit by the morning sun, Ayan realized something profound. All the pain, rejection, and mockery had been necessary, because without them, he wouldn't have fought so hard, wouldn't have built something so meaningful, wouldn't have been him. Success wasn't a destination, it was a mirror. And finally, he could look into it without flinching. He returned home to an email from his school. Yes, the same one where a teacher once said he wasn't leadership material. They were inviting him to speak at the annual convocation. Ayan chuckled when he read the message. Then he replied with one word. Yes. But he didn't walk in with ego. He walked in as someone who had survived the fire and turned it into fuel. Standing on that stage, looking at rows of young faces, he didn't give them a speech filled with stats or jargon. He told them about the rejections, the lonely nights, the laughter he heard behind his back, and how it all became the foundation of his strength. Sometimes, he said, you're not failing, you're just growing roots. And when those roots finally break through the surface, the world will call it overnight success. But you'll know the truth. You earned it. The applause echoed through the hall. And somewhere in the back row, a teacher wiped a tear from her eye. Because she remembered. She remembered the boy who sat in the second row, quiet, restless, and full of questions no one had answers to. Now, that same boy had returned, not to ask for validation, but to inspire those still trying to find their voice. It was a humid afternoon when Ayan received the most unexpected call of his life. The voice on the other end was trembling. "Beta, it's your cha-cha." A pause followed, then a heavy sigh. "I was wondering if you could speak to your cousin Raza. He's going through a tough time.
Lost his job.
I told him maybe you could help, with something in your company." Ayan leaned back in his chair, the irony soaking through the silence.
Raza.
The same cousin who once led the laughter at family dinners. The one who called him wannabe Steve Jobs. The same one who, years ago, snatched his pitch deck off the printer just to make fun of his grammar in front of everyone. And now he needed his help. It would have been easy to say no. To remind his cha-cha of the mockery, the rejection, the humiliation. But Ayan didn't. Because he'd changed. "Have him send me his resume," Ayan replied calmly. "I'll see what I can do." He didn't promise anything. But he didn't slam the door either. That was karma. Not revenge. Not payback. Just a full-circle moment where the roles had reversed, and Ion had the power to either carry the bitterness forward or break the chain. And he chose the latter. Weeks later, Raza joined Tajara, not in a high position, but in a training role. Ion didn't fast-track him, didn't bend the rules. He let the system test him the same way it tested others. To everyone's surprise, Raza adapted well. Humble, focused, even quiet. One day, during a team retreat, he walked up to Ion. "I owe you an apology," he said. "I didn't get it back then. None of us did." Ion looked at him, not with ego, not with resentment, but with understanding. "It's okay. I probably wouldn't have gotten it either if I were in your shoes." And just like that, the past lost its weight. But karma didn't just show up in family matters. It showed up in places Ion least expected, like an old professor from his university reaching out to feature him in an alumni magazine. Or a bank manager who once rejected his business loan now calling to offer him premium investment services. Or the same uncle who used to say, "Beta business to bade garan ka kam hoda hai," now proudly telling everyone, "Ion is a genius. He built it all from scratch." Everyone had changed their tune. But Ion didn't let that swell his ego. Because he had learned that validation doesn't build you, resilience does. Still, there was one thing left. One piece of the story that hadn't found closure yet. Ion visited his grandfather's grave one cloudy morning, the wind carrying whispers of old prayers through the rustling trees. This man had always been his biggest supporter, the only one who called him boss, even before he had a company. He stood there in silence, letting the memories flood back. The old rocking chair. The toffees hidden in the prayer rug. The warm hand on his shoulder saying, "Jo dil kich raha hai, wo hi sahi hai." Ion knelt down and placed a bouquet of white jasmine on the grave. "I did it, Dada," he whispered. "And I kept my promise. I made something that matters." For the first time in years, a tear rolled down his cheek, not from pain, but from peace. Because, in that moment, he knew he hadn't just proven them wrong. He had proven himself right. That night, sitting on the rooftop of his office building, Ion watched the city lights blink like stars, each one representing a story, a struggle, a dream. He thought about the journey, from being the failure in the family to becoming the foundation for others to rise. From being the butt of every joke to being the name on every invitation list. From rejection to revolution. The poetic symmetry of it all made him smile. He pulled out his phone and opened a blank note. At the top, he typed, "To everyone who laughed at me, thank you. You built me." Then he paused and added, "But more importantly, to the version of me that never gave up, I'm proud of you." Time passed, as it always does.
Seasons changed.
Cities evolved. Faces came and went. But stories, their impact remained. Ion's story, once whispered through taunts and jests, had transformed into something else entirely. It became a legend. Not the kind written in history books, but the kind spoken with awe at chai stalls, admired in boardrooms, and taught in webinars about resilience. But for Ion, the real reward wasn't the headlines or the accolades. It was something quieter, subtler. It was knowing that the little boy who once stared into the mirror and whispered, "You'll show them one day," had finally shown himself. That he was enough. That he always had been. One chilly December morning, Ion stood before a group of young dreamers at a youth entrepreneurship summit. He wasn't the keynote speaker. He had actually come just to attend quietly. But when someone spotted him, whispers turned into murmurs, and murmurs turned into chants. They requested him to speak.
So he did.
He stood with a modest posture, no slides, no prepped lines, just truth. "I want to tell you a story," he began. A story about a boy who was called a failure by his own family. They leaned in. Who was laughed at, dismissed, and overlooked. Who was told to stop dreaming, to get real, to fit in. He paused, scanning the room. That boy was me. A hush settled. But I didn't stop. Because I realized something. Your value isn't defined by their vision. Just because they can't see it, doesn't mean it's not there. He pointed to his heart. Your wealth isn't always visible at first. Sometimes it's hidden deep inside, waiting to be built, nurtured, discovered. The applause was thunderous. But more importantly, there were tears in the room. Not because of the pain in his story, but because of the power in their own. Later, as he stepped off stage, a young girl approached him. She wore worn sneakers, carried a notepad bursting with ideas, and eyes full of light. "Sir," she said shyly, "they say I'm wasting time with my coding app, that I should just become a teacher like my sister. But when you talked, I felt maybe I'm not crazy." Ayan smiled, placing a gentle hand on her shoulder. "You're not crazy. You're just ahead of your time." He scribbled something in her notepad.
Keep building.
"The world catches up." Ayan. That single sentence would go viral later, shared across platforms, quoted in books, even printed on t-shirts. But that wasn't the goal. The goal was impact. To take all the pain, the lessons, the scars, and turn them into a blueprint for others to rise. Ayan had done more than succeed. He had planted seeds, and they were beginning to grow everywhere. Back home, his mother had started telling a very different version of the story. "My son, Han wo to mashhor hogaya."
CEO, hi.
Lekin sabs badi batya hai. He never forgot his roots. She now boasted about the same traits she once feared would lead him nowhere. His stubbornness, his late-night work, his refusal to follow the normal path. His siblings, too, softened. They didn't become best friends overnight. But there was warmth now, respect. Ayan didn't need their validation anymore. But it was healing to receive it, because he had realized something powerful. Forgiveness is freedom. Not for them, but for you. Holding on to resentment is like drinking poison and expecting them to feel it. Letting go, that's where the magic begins. One evening, alone in his apartment, Ayan opened an old box. Inside it, a collection of childhood memories. A broken watch. A sketch of his first business idea. A dusty journal labeled, "Do not open until you make it." With a smile, he flipped it open. The pages were filled with dreams.
Wild.
Unfiltered. Untamed. Build something that changes lives. Be the hero your younger self needed. Make failure afraid of your name. He closed the book and whispered, "Done." But something nudged him. He picked up a pen, and on the final blank page he wrote, "This is not the end. It's just the beginning." And so, dear reader, if you've ever been called a failure, if you've ever sat alone at night, wondering if your dream is delusion, if you've ever looked in the mirror and seen potential no one else sees, know this: you are not alone, and you are not a failure. You are simply unfolding. Your hidden wealth, whether it's talent, passion, vision, kindness, resilience, it's waiting to be unveiled. The world might not be ready for you yet, but that's okay. You were born to lead it. Just like Ayan. Just like every soul who was laughed at until they laughed last.
So go.
Build quietly. Shine loudly. And when they ask where you got your strength from, just smile and say, "From every time they told me I wouldn't make it." Because the truth is, they didn't see your worth. But you did. And that changes everything.